Ken Rock here. So our speaker for January, Gene Meieran, began collecting rocks when he was 8 years old during a visit to his father's birthplace in Norway, and he's never stopped collecting. That interest led him to begin accumulating a collection, first including all type of rocks, and then becoming more focused as he began collecting crystals, which spurred his innate curiosity about unusual findings. As Gene has said, it was his interest in the properties of these specimens that led him to become a material scientist and actually study these properties for a living. After getting a BS in metallurgy at Purdue, he earned a Doctor of Science degree at MIT in 1963. His work on properties of single crystals led him to a 47-year-long career at Intel. He was one of the at Intel, which is one of the pioneers of the semiconductor industry. After his retirement from Intel in 2009, Gene became involved as a board member for both the Rice Northwest Museum of Rocks and Minerals in Portland and the University of Arizona Alfie Norville Museum in Tucson. Gene was elected to the National Academy of Engineering in 2002. He received the Carnegie Medal in 2004 and an honorary doctorate from Purdue in 2006. So it is an honor and a pleasure for me to turn the floor over to Gene Meieran.
Considering my 47 years at Intel, being a senior technologist, I find using Zoom to be particularly frustrating. So if things don't work out, we're going to have a little bit of playing around. It's about an hour talk, and it took me about 15 hours to put it together and another 3 to get it so it's working this afternoon. So we shall see. Okay, 87 years. I'll do it in 87 years in 1 second. I collect rocks. Any questions? I guess you're all muted. Anyway, it really was transforming an accumulation, which is what all kids do when they start collecting at an early age, and turning it into a real collection, which took me about 50 years to do that. And then I got what I have now, which we'll go into a little bit later. But I was born in Cleveland, Ohio, the same place that my cousin Martha Lynette was born, as the wife of Paul Bailey, who's on the line. I don't know if Martha's on. My parents were the Freeze people, born in the Terminal Tower in Cleveland in 1932, and I was born there in 1937. My first episode of collecting rocks was a trip to Petoskey, Michigan, right after World War II ended in 1945. We drove down through Toledo and up to Detroit, where my father had some relatives, and then up to Petoskey, and I managed to find a Petoskey stone, which, speaking of, it's not quite the fossil that was mentioned a few minutes ago, but it was a neat thing for a kid to find a fossil like that. But I didn't do much on it, except for an incident that happened 4 years earlier. The Petoskey stone started me on a journey where I collected the great Cleveland specimens like shale, tremendous sandstone, and then an episode where my brother, who was a couple of years older than me, was asked to create a rock collection. So I went out and found this piece of conglomerate that I sold from a neighbor's garden. The only an interesting rock, I think, in all of Cleveland area. That led me to a thing, which was when I drive down Cedar Hill in Cleveland, there's a little part of an exposed shale block. And I always envisioned that the little cave that I saw there would have giant quartz crystals in it. So one day I actually stopped my father's car and got out and went up to this thing. Turned out there was more shale behind it. But the thing that really was the impetus started in 1940, actually, when my Uncle Sigmund, who's on the right in the picture on the left, escaped from Norway when the Nazis invaded Norway. And he came through Cleveland to join the Royal Norwegian Air Force in Toronto. My father was an insurance salesman. My uncle was more of a technical person, electrical engineering kind of thing. And he got me interested as well as in the outdoors. He was always a hiker and a skier, and everything outdoors was a fun. After the war was over, my father took the 4 kids, the 2 kids of my wife, my mother, to Norway to visit the remaining family. And it turned out that one of my Uncle Sigmund's friends, do you see the arrow here? Does anyone see the arrow? I'll assume you do. I can't hear
I'm
any.
not seeing an
I don't,
arrow.
Okay, never mind. The person next to him in that picture is Gunnar Henningsmoen. He was a childhood friend of my uncle, and he took me out collecting. He was the head of the paleontology museum in Oslo, Norway, the Museum of Natural History, which is in the upper right. So 11 years old, 10 years old, I went to this museum. Gunnar took me out collecting, and I was sold at that time. Gunnar was really a paleontologist, an expert in trilobites. But the first thing I remember that really turned me on is when he took me to the museum in 1949. And my first natural history museum memory was a giant Tyrannosaurus Rex skeleton in the first hall of the museum, which is still there. And that just really, really impressed me. And I decided to go out rock collecting. Came home from Norway to good old boring Cleveland, Ohio. And well, one of the things that the Gunnars gave me, Gunnar Henningsmoen gave me, was from Norway, where my father was born near the famous Kongsberg silver mines. And Gunnar gave me a piece of Kongsberg silver, which is what I show there. But not knowing that I would really like this, the things that I missed were silver specimens like that, which were sold at spot silver price in the 1949, 50, 51, 52 timeframe. And you can see at the bottom left part of that specimen of silver, a little screw. That's how you show that they had these things screwed into little wooden blocks for tourists to buy. So you could have bought a lot of specimens for essentially spot silver price. And Bill Larson told me an interesting story recently of a famous dealer who went to Norway, bought 1 metric ton of these wire silver specimens for $28,000, couldn't pay, and the smelter smelted them down. And those $28,000 is probably worth $1 billion now or more. But a lot of great specimens disappeared. Anyway, when I got back home to Cleveland, I really found collecting interesting. So I started on my first collecting trip to Ellsworth, Ohio, which is a Dana location for gypsum. And I went through the brush and the things to the riverbed and actually found some nice little gypsum crystals, which I still have. These were collected in about 1950-51 time frame. But of course, collecting and knowing what to do are two different things. So I got these, but I also got a healthy dose of poison ivy, which is what these things were embedded in. And then went to Purdue University in 1955, and I called that the interregnum because that's when I really started a serious collecting. And it's because I met a guy named Ed Rushton, and he was a collector of par excellence. At the age of 19 at the time, he had a collection which would have been competition of any of the great collections now. He was a real collector. He started a company in Camden, Maine called Camden Mineral Company at the age of 18. And I remember in his basement when I walked in there, he had this beautiful stibnite specimen, which eventually he would offer to sell for $500. And I didn't have $500 at the time, so I never got it. But Ed Rushton and I went out collecting in Purdue. We started serious field collecting, and he knew all the localities, and he knew all those species, and he knew an incredible amount, a real professional in this. And so we collected at the Meshberger Quarry in Columbus, Indiana, and Monon. And one of the interesting specimens is the one in the bottom middle. It's smythite, which you can't see, but it's little tiny, tiny grains of iron sulfide, Fe3S4, which is the equivalent of magnetite, except it's a sulfide, magnetite being Fe3F4. And of course, that's the reason for that formula is because the magnetite is really a composition made up from hematite, Fe2O3, and I forgot what the name of the other iron ore is, basite or something, FeO. So you get Fe3O4 when you put them all together. And smythite is a sulfide equivalent, extremely rare, and Ed found a place to collect it. And this has a big influence later on. So we went collecting. I learned a lot about mineralogy and then started the real collecting when I went to MIT. And of course, MIT is nearby the Harvard Mineral Museum. So I started going there a lot and saw a really lot of tremendously fine specimens. One summer I went out rock collecting in California. I had a summer job in California, and I went to a number of locations that you can't get to now. One in the upper left is the famous Crestmore Quarry, which had something like 170 different mineral specimens. The second one on the bottom left, to the second one to the right, is Mangano flowite, which is a mica type of material. We went out to the borax mines in Borax, California, and got colmanite and ulexite and all that. A beautiful pegmatite location called Nuevo, which is now just a housing thing. They filled in all the mines, closed all the areas to collect. And then I started meeting people that were interested in collecting and did some trading. So I got a wonderful franklinite as a trade for some of these borate minerals, and went up to New Hampshire and collected fluorite at what's now the Cohen mine. But the interesting one is the one on the left, which is a rhodonite, which I did not collect, but I got it for a different area. That's because of Harvard University. Go over to Harvard at the time and you see the wonderful display there. You see these incredible specimens like the golden horn from Colorado, some slices of tourmaline from Mount Mica, I think it's Mount Mica or the Plumbago mine. And I met Cliff Rondell, who was a curator and a highly respected professor of mineralogy, and we had a lot of time together. And the reason it became interesting is because I had this smithite that I'd collected in Indiana, and Harvard had none. So he traded me, Cliff, and I arranged a trade for a bunch of Franklin minerals, which I knew very little about at the time, for the couple of smithite specimens that I traded to him. I believe they are still there in the museum. But at MIT, really started to get things in four ways. I started collecting, for example, quartz crystals from New York. Bought a specimen in a store in Providence, Rhode Island. As I say, I traded for a beautiful franklinite crystal. And then I was given this wonderful beryl crystal that I'll show you later after the show is over. Got that in 1960 as a result of one of the best things that I did in all of minerals. We'll come to that later on. So it shows me really, as you can see at the bottom, that there was a collected Herkimer purchased from a rock shop, or actually not a rock shop because they had this labeled wrong. They had it labeled as tourmaline in this gift shop in Providence. Franklinite, I traded from this guy who was interested in borax minerals, and the gift from the people who had, which I'll tell you about more later. So that's how I started accumulating a collection from these four kinds of different sources. Now, when I was at MIT, I was doing X-ray diffraction work and looking at the properties of single crystals. And I had to use a piece of specialized X-ray equipment that wasn't at the MIT lab, but a graduate of MIT, a doctor's degree in metallurgy from MIT had a laboratory about a quarter of a mile, half a mile away from MIT. And he had a thing called Man Labs, manufacturing laboratories. And they had a piece of X-ray equipment which they offered to let me use. So for 3 years, I would trundle my way over there to use this piece of X-ray equipment to do the kind of X-ray diffraction studies that I was doing. They also had a subsidiary company that was doing work on single crystals for use in X-ray monochrometers. You didn't have the solid state monochrometer X-ray fluorescence methods you have today. You had to use crystal diffraction off a single crystal and then rotate the crystal through a spectrum of X-rays in order to identify the characteristic fluorescence of minerals. And Phil and Andy Cullen, the owners of Man Labs, had a business of creating, building, growing, purchasing single crystals for use in X-ray monochrometers. One of them that I worked on that I helped them work on was destined for the moon in the original Surveyor project, but was cut out of the first moon landing. Well, one day, Phil Cullen, the president of the company, while I was hoping to come to his office, and I came into his office, and he's sitting at the far end, and he says, "Gene, take a look at these. What do you think of them?" And he looks backward, and behind him on the floor are these two topaz crystals. And I look at them and say, well, they have to be calcite because there's nothing else that size that looks like that, even I'm 20 feet away from them. And he says, no, what else? And I said, well, they have to be topaz. And he said, yeah, enjoy them because they're going to be cut into monochromators tomorrow. And it is a true story that I, as a graduate student, 20 years old, 21 years old, speaking to the president of the manufacturing labs company, a very, very famous metallurgist, I said to him, Phil, if you cut those up, I will kill you. He took me seriously and he kept the things, and eventually they made their way to the Smithsonian Museum, along with a third crystal, which made its way to Harvard. So these three crystals are ones that I feel very proud of because I saved them from total destruction. These were actually shown in the hall next to the Hope Diamond for a while. Now they're in the main gem gallery. And my wife and I took a visit there. There's my wife Rosalind next to the big quartz crystals. And then you can see an image of them through the big giant quartz crystal ball. That you can see the inverted image of the two topazes. So it's one thing that I really, really am quite proud of. Then I started to pick up speed when I graduated from MIT, went out to join Fairchild Semiconductor in California. It was because of my work in single crystals that I took a job at Fairchild. One of the founders of Fairchild, a guy named Sheldon Robertson, who was also a metallurgist, came to MIT, interviewed me, convinced me to go into semiconductor crystal technology instead of nuclear materials technology. So I went out to California and started to do things. There, I went out to the San Benito mines and actually found the pieces of neptunite and benitoite that are shown there. I lived in the Bay Area, so we lived near Mount Diablo, and I could go up to the famous Mount Diablo mine, which is no longer in existence, and find tons of metacinnabar. I took a trip for a year. I took off from Fairchild and went on a trip. I taught courses in X-ray diffraction in England and in Israel. And in England, right near Bristol, which is where I was located, there was a famous place called Yate, and you could just go up there and dig in the red mud and pull out 1,000,000 celestite crystals like the one there. It's now a housing district. You can't find anything.
Hey,
And
Gene,
then,
sorry to interrupt.
pardon?
Sorry to interrupt. This is John Sanborn. I just wanted to point out your Sanbornite. That was not named after me.
Say that again?
Sanbornite.
Oh,
This is
I
John
haven't
Sanborn.
talked about that one yet.
Sorry,
Then I
but I
came
am so
to
happy you
Israel. When I went to
made my
Israel,
day.
I actually had a chance to go out to the Sinai Desert. We went to the famous Egyptian turquoise mines, and we actually found it driving out there with an Arab with a big musket guarding it. And I found this piece of turquoise, which was worth 25 cents there then. It's probably worth 25 cents now, but it's self-collected turquoise. Then one day I was out in Fresno County, California with Cy Fraser and his wife, and he took a group of people up to go pick up Sanbornite, who was named after, I'm sorry, who was that? Mr.
It's me
Sanborn.
right here, John Sanborn.
So anyway, we're in the Sanbornite area up in the quarry near Fresno, California. And Cy is the group leader, and all the people, he had about 10 people there. They are also novices, and they are sort of following him like a duck, ducklings follow a duck. So Cy was up in front, and he was sitting in this trench where the Sanbornite is found, and he pulled out a piece of Sanbornite, and then he moved on to his right. And I was standing behind him, laughing. All the ducklings, these people that were collecting after him, and they were saying, "Oh, ah, my God, look at it." Because if you look in the Samronite, you find occasional little red crystals called gillespite. And they were finding gillespite, and Asai was finding none. So they were all saying, "Oh, look, gillespite. And Sai was really upset. He could find none. And I was laughing. Turned out that Sai was hitting his hand with a hammer, and the blood spatters would get on the rocks, and the people following were picking up what was thought to be gillespite, which is really cyphaserite blood specimens of Cy Fraser's spattered blood. I thought that was really, I've talked to both Cy and Annie. I talked to Annie, and they get a kick out of this story. But that is a self-collected sandbornite. Then a fateful day, my brother was a nuclear metallurgist. He was living in Brazil. I went down to Brazil and I bought some aquamarines, and I decided to try and sell them. And I had a little garage sale at my house in Los Altos, California. And Jack Halpern happened to come down. I had no idea who Jack Halpern was. But he came down and looked at the crystals I had, wasn't interested. But he found that I knew enough about crystals and the technology and all that. He invited me up to his house, my wife and I up to his house. Went up to his house and met his wife Leslie and Jack, and had a beautiful time there. And then he invites me into his basement. I don't know how many of you have been to Jack Halpern's basement. Jack is now 105 years old, by the way. And as soon as you walk down the stairs, you walk down the cellar stairs, and then you make a right turn, walk down the final part, then you make a left turn into the basement. And the first three things I saw were these two beautiful liticodite tourmaline specimens mounted in a case right in front of you as you walk into this room. And to the left, he had about, I would guess 20 cases filled, crammed with wonderful specimens. And the one I went to was the Kongsberg silver, because of my father's relationship with having come from Norway, and Gunnar Henningsmoen having given me the first Kongsberg silver that was worth 25 cents worth then and 25 cents worth now. But this is a beautiful, beautiful specimen. So I got introduced to Jack Halpern, and that fundamentally changed the way I look at minerals. I used to collect everything that was not nailed down, the accumulation. I collected every kind of beautiful, as well as dull, ugly. As long as it had a chemical formula with it, I collected as a species, and I ended up owning about 14 or 1,500 different species of things that nobody would really look at. But Halpern had such a beautiful collection, I decided that my days of being a species collector were over. And I changed the thread of how I was starting to collect. Jack is, as I say, 105, visited him on his 104th birthday last year. Moved to Arizona when I went to Intel, and Intel opened a large facility in Arizona. Moved to Arizona and lived there from 1978 through, actually Arizona was 1978 through 2009. And the accumulation of all the stuff became a collection because of two prominent individuals, the Wayne Thompson effect and the Rob Levinsky effect. Went self-collecting again, went to the Red Cloud mine and found these specimens, and this wonderful second specimen of wolfenite is absolutely gorgeous, except it's only about 1/4 of an inch in diameter or size. But then Wayne invited me to join him in the San Francisco mine in just south of the border in Mexico. And there we pulled out some very, very nice wolfenite specimens, wolfenite and mimetite, wolfenite and barite, which became quite prominent specimens to be collected. The way Thompson changed my life is that he was now starting to deal in crystals from Pakistan. And I met him at one of the Tucson shows many, many years earlier. I didn't pay much attention to him because it's long-haired hippie. And my wife and I were standing next to a case of azurite from the TGMS show. And Wayne was standing there, this hippie. I was 30 at the time or whatever, 35. And Wayne had not started collecting. I had been collecting for more years than Wayne had been born. And so I didn't think he knew anything, but we were looking at the azurite, and I'd point out this one. I said, boy, what a great azurite. Then I pointed out another one. That's even better. And this guy at the end of the case said to me, oh, that's not that good. That's only the 5th best. And the one over there is only in the 3rd best. And the 2nd best is in the British Museum in case number 47, specimen number. And I collected all those myself. And I said, bull, doesn't happen. Paid no attention to him, went back to California at the time. This is about 1973, 1974, after we had this find at the San Francisco mine, the original find. And then I moved to Phoenix, looked him up, met him at a rock shop when there was a meeting, sort of like your meeting at one of the rock shops in Phoenix. And I was looking at the rocks in the shop, and then there's this collective, oh, there's Wayne Thompson. And it was like, bringing in John Lennon or Elvis Presley or something. And I looked around, there's this hippie-ish young guy. And I said, oh, yeah, that's Wayne Thompson, who cares? And they pointed out, well, he found the best azurites in the world. He found the best wolfenites in the world. He found the best cuprites in the world. He found the best malachites in the world. He was also a pottery collector. And he and I became good friends. And he's the one that really got me into the single crystal world. So now I have an accumulation of several thousand specimens, only a few of which, because of Jack Halpern, are turning into crystals. And because of Wayne Thompson, I'm starting to spend money on crystals. And there's good old Wade. We became very, very, very good friends. Many ventures together. Two of the ventures led to these two specimens, which are now in major museum. The Pakistan aqua is in the Mineralogical Museum in Beirut, Lebanon. I don't know why I let it go, but I traded it for some other stuff. Beautiful, beautiful aqua. And this one is now at the Harvard. It's a Jonas pocket rubellite tourmaline. The tourmaline crystal is actually about 13 inches in diameter. The quartz crystal is about 3 feet long, 2.5 feet, 3 feet long. And I had nowhere to deal with that sort of thing. It came with another rock, so I donated it to the Harvard Museum. So that's another sort of thing which I've populated museum with fairly good specimens over my time. There's Wayne and I collecting at one of the mines. I think this is the San Francisco mine. Yes, because these are two of the specimens that we collected there. We also went to Namibia in 1990. Wayne Thompson, Bill Barker, who was a gem dealer, and I were invited there by a guy who had this tourmaline mine. And he had found a pocket, and he asked if Bill wanted to go. And Bill asked me and Wayne. We decided, of course, we're going to go. And these are some of the specimens that pulled out, the tourmaline and the quartz. I remember sitting in there and just holding out these quartz crystals one after another. It's like somebody took a pail and poured in quartz crystals. All you had to do was pull them out. And the same thing with this very well crystallized lepidolites. So that was a wonderful thing. But that brought me back to the single crystals and the crystal collection. I remember that first stibnite crystal, which is a matrix specimen, but from Japan. So I then bought a beautiful matrix specimen when I was still, just before I finally turned into the single crystals, and then traded that to Will Larson. And then in his later years, last year, Jack Halpern gifted me this wonderful large Japan stibnite crystals. And my wife, Rosalind, who is a ceramic artist and deals with color and all that, her favorite two minerals are silver and stibnite, these gray silverish things. Kind of surprises me. But that tells me what I could have had and didn't have. I was at the Red Cloud mine with George Godis. I found that little crystal. I was digging it in place. I gave up. George walked in, and then within a half an inch later, he pulled out 22 crystals of really nice wolfenite. I was at the fluorite mines in New Hampshire, right in the mines where they found these beautiful fluorite specimens several years later. I collected at several main mines for tourmaline. Years later, they pulled out these phenomenal big tourmaline crystals which they sliced up. So I could have done that, but I didn't. One of those things you just sort of regret, like the guy with a $28,000 silver worth $1 billion now. Then I met Brian Lees and we went into Sweet Home, and that also changed my life. I'm trying to show you the fact that two things changed my life: the museums and the specimens that you can see, and the people that I was associated with during my trips through the mineral world. Met Brian Lees, and that's because he had a Kongsberg silver for sale. Wasn't this particular one, but no, he had this was a Colorado silver for sale. And I was starting to think of collecting silver specimens, again, because of my father. And he had this one, and I bought it, and then he bought it back for me. But he knew I knew enough about minerals. So when the Sweet Home Mine, he was considering opening it, he asked me, and I asked John Lucking, and Marty Zinn joined in, the four of us, become the Sweet Home Project, which then pulled out, I don't know how much it's worth now, but an incredible amount of Sweet Home rhodochrosites. This is the one I still have at home. I did not collect that one personally, but I collected some that were quite good out of the mine. But that silver stuff led me from Brian to this is the silver specimens I now have. Kongsberg silver, there's a couple here, one from China, one from Michigan. But this is the silvers that I managed to accumulate, and I'll tell you how I accumulated them shortly. These are three of the Kongsberg specimens I now have. As I say, these are my wife's favorite specimen. The one in the center is her favorite specimen of my entire collection. So I self-collected a number of things, real helite and chinoite from the mines in Arizona. Collected as you can see, a nice rhombohedron of the rhodochrosite from Colorado. And it was really neat to be part of that whole time. Brings me back to technology and Moore's Law. Gordon Moore was one of the founders of Fairchild Semiconductor and one of the two founders of Intel. And after I was at Fairchild for about 9 or 10 years, I was requested to join Intel. I joined in founding the package development department. And Gordon Moore was famous for it. Anybody in technology knows Moore's Law. Moore's Law is shown in this slide. It says basically the complexity of a chip doubles every chip generation in about 18 months. And as you make more chips, the chips get smarter and you can pay more for them. And therefore the price of the chips go up. Therefore the value of Intel goes up, such that Intel was considered what Apple or NVIDIA is considered today. We are the most valued and valuable company in the world because of this following of Moore's Law. And you can see my contribution was that I started in 1963. We were making silicon crystals about the size that you see there, a little bigger than a thumb. Silicon. So now they make silicon like you see the crystals in the middle, the big crystal in the middle. The Czochralski-grown silicon crystal, which is amazingly almost defect-free because of the work that I did on studying how defects grow and propagate in single crystals. And at the same time, the devices went from a simple transistor to the fantastically integrated circuits that you see now. Which brings me what Moore's Law did for me. And I'll come back to that in a moment also, which brings me to the other change in life, Rob Levinsky. I had these 12 or 1,500 related species, chemical species, crystals, different locations, none of which are particularly attractive except for a couple of silvers and that aquamarine that was given to me in 1960 and a few things I collected. I traded all of that, probably 1,200 specimens, for this tanzanite. Now, the reason I was able to do that is because Moore's Law made Intel stock vastly increase in value. So I could go and get more value for the stock and then buy minerals with it. So it changed fundamentally the way and type of minerals I wanted. So I started collecting more specimens like these, which are all in my collection now. The one on the upper left is an alco from Pakistan I got from Wayne Thompson. So is the middle one on the bottom. The two on the right are the famous Pioneer and Heliodor from Brazil that were once owned by Keith Proctor. And the bottom one on the left is an emerald that was called by somebody since. We know, Gene, you like single crystals, large ones, and you look like you have barrel crystals. Would you want this one? And so I flew down to get that thing. So I started collecting those kinds of crystals. You can see other aquas that I have. There's One on the left is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful heliodor from Ukraine. The one on the bottom is a morganite from Brazil. The one on the right is a double crystal from Pakistan. The one on the top is one from bought from a guy named John Saul, who I had met when we were doing that trip. I met John Saul in Nairobi, Africa. He happened to have been an MIT graduate as well in geology, and he saw my MIT ring. And so when I'm talking to him, he says, "Oh, that's a brass rat." We became friends as a result of the MIT ring. That is my favorite specimen. It's a single crystal of a morganite goshenite, absolutely lustrous. It's my idea of what a crystal should look like. And I have more crystals, a big blue aqua from Pedro Azul in Brazil. The result of Moore's law with the Jonas Mine tourmaline to the left, big tourmaline in the center from the blue cap pocket, and another one I got from a guy named Pierre Leville in Brazil, a beautiful scepter. All three of those crystals are greater than 8 inches long. And more. And more. Kunzites, topazes. This is the reason that's important, is that Moore's law is that straight line you see there. But if you, instead of plotting the complexity of devices on a straight line, you plot the price of individual mineral specimens as a function of time, you find it beats Moore's law, which is a reason why Intel stock went up so fast, because all of a sudden you got a lot of money for the crystals because of Moore's law, but the specimens were going up faster, and therefore a specimen at the bottom left, the one that is labeled 1950, the silver, which could have been bought in Oslo when I was there for $5 or $10, is probably now worth 400,000. The tourmaline crystal that I saw, I went to Bill Larson's house in 1972 or 73, right after he made that find, and you could have bought that crystal for $5,000 along with the others. It's probably $5 million now. The one in the Smithsonian, the candelabra, was probably $7,000 then. Now if you could buy it, it'd be 10 or 12 million now. The rhodochrosite I got with Brian Lee's, it sold for quite a bit at that time in the 1990s, but now it's fat. This is the reason I was able to get the crystals that I do, because I followed Moore's law as a result of the Intel stock, which I got because I was there in the very early days of Intel. But I want to show you that story of Moore's law. It starts with sandstone or silica, like I find in Cleveland. You refine that into pure silica, and you take that pure silica and reduce it down to metallic silicon, polycrystalline metallic silicon. You take that, which is now worth more than the sandstone or the quartz, and you turn it into one of these silicon crystals, which is worth a lot more than the silicon, polysilicon up above. You take that and turn it into the silicon wafers, which contain the hundreds or thousands of devices, each of which becomes more and more valuable as you follow Moore's law. And so this wafer is now worth $1 million. And you take that and put it into a package. There's the device. You put it into a package. And these were the things that I was in charge of at Intel, was finding the package, the materials for packaging these things. And therefore you got enough money to buy a better quartz crystal. So I just turned silica into silica. That's Moore's law in my estimation.
Gotta love it.
So in one slide, that's where I came from in Cleveland, and that's where I went as a validated by Moore's law. I turned sandstone into quartz. You know, it took a long time for the Earth to do that. I did that in a space of 40 years. So since I like single crystals, I started playing with them. These are just fun slides. These are Photoshop, but these are all of crystals that I own. I just got a kick out of it because I was looking at skyscrapers in New York, and I decided to put the crystals together and like a cityscape. Tourmaline, topaz, these are all to scale. Aquamarine, beryl, actually, all the varieties of beryl. Kunzite, spodumene, just to get a kick out of them. I just think that the property, this is what turned me on to the properties of crystals, is the shape, the size, the color, the transparency, the surface etching, the surface defects, the twinning, everything about the crystals fascinated me. Two other things I did that I'm really quite proud of. One of them I'm proud of because it happened to be. The other I'm quite proud of because I did, is that the 8 people you see in the table in 2006, 2005 actually, I was sitting at a table with Bill Pinch at his dinner, and I had an idea for doing a Tucson show other than the ones that I had been doing. So I turned to my left and said to this person, Shields Flynn, I said, what about doing a show on American minerals? Wendell Wilson was there, so I talked to him, and then got Brian Lees involved, Bob Jones, and Jeff Scoville for photography. We decided to put together a big show, which is called now the American Mineral Treasures, which led to the book that you see on the left. And there had to be, I think we counted, I selected 50 cases representing the best mineral species in the United States, convinced all the dealers and the collectors and the museums to contribute to that. And they had probably the best show ever in Tucson, which showed the best specimens from 50 best mines in the United States. You can still get this book. There's a few left still for sale. And the other is a funny story. You see this green specimen with the little blue dots in it. You actually magnify the blue dots, and they are crystals. And Rob Levinsky had the bright idea of getting these to a person at the University of Arizona that I knew very well to identify it. And it turned out to be a new mineral, which Rob Levinsky inspired to be called Meieranite. So I got a mineral named after me. And of those specimens, there are 4 of them like that. And there's probably 10 micrograms of Meieranite in the world as a result of those 4 specimens. But a few years later, some more was found. And you can see it there. It's not the purple sugilite, but it's the blue crystals there. So they found some more specimens of Meieranite. So I'm quite proud of having a mineral named after me. I think I have 7 of the 8 specimens known. The other one is the one of, the other part of the Meieranite story is I was in the show in China with Rob Levinsky, and I gave a talk on museums at the China show, and we walk out of the hall, we sit down on the table, and we're just talking after my talk. And I look over to my left about 20 feet away, there's a display case, and it was filled with cases of models of single crystals, which fascinated me. That's what I do. So I walked over there and I found this specimen case, which was an exact example of Meieranite, the actual crystal structure of Meieranite, which they gave to me, and I still have it here right in back of me at home. So I'm really quite proud of that. That, the topaz at the Smithsonian, and the 2008 American Mineral Treasures show are the 3 things that I guess would call the highlight of my mineral collecting career. So my final message after this tedious talk: mineral collecting for me, you hear this saying all the time, it's not a destination, it's a trip, or it's not a trip, it's a destination, but it is neither a trip nor a destination. I'm 88 years old, 87 years old. I want to go out and find minerals. I want to go to all the places to collect minerals. I want to buy the best specimens, and I get very envious of the people that have better specimens than I have. I want to go to Norway and get more silver. I want to go to Africa and find more. I just want to do it all. And of course, physically not possible. And that's because it is an addictive, untreatable, and highly expensive disease. But I enjoy it. That's it. I'm going to switch away from the slides and show you a couple of specimens now, if I can figure out how to do this. So I got to go and I'm not sure if I remember how to stop share. And there I am. Okay. I was asked to show when I was putting this together. Well, here's the barrel crystal that was given to me by the people who cut the topaz into the X-ray monochrometers. The two of them in the Smithsonian. I got a few pieces of the cut crystals, including some terminations, which I donated to the Smithsonian. But they were kind enough to give me this beautiful, pale, but absolutely flawless barrel crystal, because they were going to cut it to make X-ray monochrometers, which were about that long and quite thin, and used for X-ray fluorescence analysis. I went to get rid of all of my big bulk specimens, and I traded for one specimen. And this is the tanzanite crystal I got from Rob Levinsky for 1,200 or so little specimens. I think we're going to find the light to shine through it. $12 million flashlights. There's one.
That's crazy.
It is crazy. It's just it's my kind of crystal right now. So that's the second crystal I have in the collection. But if you have one tanzanite, that's not enough. So I got another tanzanite. What do I do with the flashlight?
Wow.
If you can't have two, you should have four. That's my philosophy on rocks.
Those are all natural colors, Gene?
These are all natural. These are not treated.
Wow.
Wayne Thompson and I, when we were working with Bill Barker, Bill got a beautiful, beautiful tanzanite, about like this one, that was going to be too expensive for me to own. So it went to Jack Halpern, and is one of the most famous specimens now ever. Is Jack, his collection was phenomenal. Jack and Rob Levinsky's putting out a book about Jack, and the tanzanite crystal is one of the famous crystals he had, along with the silver. I showed you those two liticodite specimens before, and Rob Levinsky, who's dealing with the Halpern collection, has the rights to sell them, and he donated those two tourmaline specimens, the butterfly wings, to me, because he knew I loved them, and they were the ones that inspired me so long ago. And one other specimen. Where is it?
Look at
Is that
I'm just trying to see it. There it is.
tourmaline?
Look
True
at terminal.
map. And this is one that was not known, was not even known by Bill Larson or Ed Swoboda when they're collecting. One of the miners there took it, and it only showed up many, 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 many years later, to a surprise for everybody. And I I've got this one from Rob Levinsky with some other trade. But again, it's just my idea of a crystal. It's a single crystal with incredible properties. They happen to be beautiful, which is an influence of Jack Halpern. Comes from great locations.
Can you hold that up a little higher? So we don't...
Because of Gunnar Henningsmoon. And that's the story of my life.
Can you hold that last crystal up so we can all see it?
By the way, this is the model of Meironite.
Wow.
And this is the tourmaline.
Great.
And it's really quite a crystal. I can't. Yeah, there it is.
Whoa.
That's a crystal.
And I don't know if we can see behind. Can you see that at all?
Yes.
That's my collection of crystals. Anyone, any questions? I'm willing to answer.
I always wonder when I see those giant crystals, have you ever dropped one of them?
I have, yes. I had a beautiful quartz crystal from Brazil that I was trying to clean, and I dropped it. And it was so almost looked like a Japanese twin. Where am I here? And one part broke off, and I repaired it. So yeah, and I've had a couple more where yes, I have. I'm really good with knowing rocks. I'm really good with numbers. I am absolutely lousy with names, and I'm also very clumsy.
One of the things you're obviously great at is documenting your own, what you call addiction. To understand how and who are the people who changed you is a marvelous gift. So thank you for that. But I'm curious, the book that you showed, where the 7 or 8 of you put together the
Say again?
the treasures of the American treasures,
Yeah.
you wrote the afterword for that, not the forward. Would it be too much, even though that was years ago? What did you say after, about pulling this together?
There's a lot of stories behind that American mineral treasures, convincing the museums and the dealers and all that to bring the really expensive stuff to the show. And I spent a lot of time in it. But then the articles that were in the book were written by the people that I had nothing to do with writing the articles, which is why my name doesn't show up on the front of the book. It just shows up in the print. I put the thing together. I got all the people together. I got them all to give the things. And I just said, we can do something at Tucson that's never been done before. And I had enough of a good reputation that they accepted it and do it. And I'll tell you that I'm talking with Peter McGaw right now about the possibility of putting the best European collection together, 50 of the best European mines stuff. So again, it's one of these things that I'm tired, I'm old, I'm crippled, but I'm going to do it.
Yay, thank you.
Do you?
I also have one obvious question. It's kind of an odd question to ask, but single crystal. Most of us don't think in terms of what a single crystal is and how it's different from what is different? Is it multiple crystals, or can you say more about that, realizing that some of us don't really know?
There's several ways of thinking about the crystal. Let me get something here. We'll start with the thing that most people work on, that like better. That is matrix specimens. A crystal on a matrix. Now, this is a single crystal on a matrix, but you could have 2 of those crystals penetrating each other. You could have them stacked on each other. So those would be single crystals mounted on each other, but then I would not call them a single crystal. I would call it a matrix specimen. But within the single crystal category, you have all kinds of things. You have spodumene, which has a beautiful twin plane. So it's actually 2 crystals that are mirror image to each other. So that is a single crystal, even though in real terms, if you were to try and look at the properties, it would look like 2 crystals. If you look at a piece of metal and you polish it and put in acid and etch it, turns out to be all crystals. That's polycrystalline. Many, many, many tiny crystals all fused together. Come up with other kinds of crystal terms. So you can start with an amorphous material, which is, like water, but crystallizes in hexagonal crystals as ice. But then you can get water, you can get amorphous, you can get to opal, which is hydrated and has sort of a structure. Then you get to a crystal, which has a uniform structure of, repeating atoms along the planes. Then you could take this crystal and mount it like that. That's a twin. Or you can make it like that, which means it's a polycrystal, or you can put several on top of it and add a matrix. I just happen to like the idea of a single crystal by itself, even though I have a couple like the Japanese twin. I consider, from my point of view, I consider a Japanese twin like that to be a single crystal. So I collect Japanese twins, oddball things like scepters. But I don't go much for having them mounted on a matrix like most people do.
Hey, thank you.
Could I ask a question? The barrel that you identified as your favorite, that gorgeous Morganite, Goshenite specimen, what's the locality on that?
I think I have the name somewhere, but that wasn't sure. It's from Minas Gerais, Brazil.
Oh, it might be Resplendor, yeah.
It is a resplendor, yeah. There are
It's
2 or
beautiful.
3 of them that came out like that.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
There's one I think the Smithsonian has one. I don't know. Do you have one?
I do not.
Yeah, I got it from John Saul, as I say. I met him in 1963 in Nairobi, and you had a brass rat on your hand. And I got that, I don't know, 1990 or so, when he knew about me, he knew my interest in crystals. It's just, I could show it to you. This is not it. This is it.
Wow.
Whoa,
That is wonderful.
whoa.
Wow.
The luster is phenomenal. All the faces are perfect. Just a marvel.
That's what it's all about.
Hmm?
That's what it's all about right there.
For me, yeah.
Me too.
Gene, I thought it was pretty interesting. You talked about how Moore's law applies not just to semiconductors, but also to the value of mineral specimens. Does that hold?
That's my invention.
It's pretty interesting. In your opinion, does that same principle hold for the specimens on matrix or smaller
Oh
individual
yeah. Oh no, for sure.
across
The
the board?
rhodochrosites on matrix of, yeah. I once made a real graph of it when I found out the prices that people were selling things that had been resold over a period of years. It's just staggering. Yeah, it's matrix, just goods. They are the good specimens. They're not the average specimens.
Right,
They
right,
are the
right.
good specimens. Like Intel was making the good chips.
286, 386.
386, yeah, 486, 686.
By the way, just a real quick comment. I'm a volunteer at the Geology, Gems, and Mineral Hall at the Smithsonian. Been doing it for a number of years, and those giant topaz crystals are right at the entrance to the gem hall. You move from the room with the Hope Diamond into the gem hall, and those crystals are standing right there. Everybody looks at them, and there's a sign. One of them 70 pounds, another one's 120 pounds. And you can see indentations on the sides where it was attached to the rock. They're spectacular specimens, and everybody sees them. What a wonderful thing to have done at such a young age.
Yeah, as I say, I'm just happy that I prevented them from being cut. One of them that was cut was an equivalent crystal where I kept the top of it, which I gave to Jeff Post a number of years ago. But it was a crystal, the top, only the top, just the top surface was about this big. The crystal had to be even bigger. And they cut it into monocrometers.
Mm.
Wow.
I was just so appalled that Phil Keelan was really going to cut that thing.
I have a question concerning the silver specimens, and I'm going to show my ignorance here. But do collectors have to polish those silver specimens, or do you leave them in the natural state?
We leave them in the natural state. Lapidary people can polish what they want. A mineral collector will not polish a specimen. Now, that is not totally true. For example, I showed you those specimens of tourmaline lidocodite from Madagascar. Those were polished slices. But the only way you see the internal structure of those things is if I slice them in different ways. And that steps over the boundary of what you do. But no, none of these faces are polished. None, zero. You don't polish specimens.
Thank you.
You take it, just to give you an idea, you take a crystal that costs $1,000 and you polish it, you may not be able to give it away to a collector.
So this is John. I got a question about those two specimens that, sorry, I don't recall the name, but they're in the Smithsonian that you prevented from being cut. Do you have an idea of the value, the dollar value that the gentleman gave up by letting you take those and give them to a museum?
Well, remember, this is 1960. So they were bought, a group of 9 of them were bought from a very, very famous mineral collector named Alan Kaplan. So probably at the time they were, I don't know. Well, that's two ways to answer that. At the time they were probably $10,000 or $15,000, say. But if he cut them up and he got 100 monochromators on them at $2,000 each, that's $250,000. So he could have been given, he could have thought of that he might have gotten $250,000 by selling them. But then at the same time, roughly at the time when people were starting to think about solid state detectors, which basically put that whole business of X-ray fluorescence on a different trajectory. So, you know, you don't need them anymore, except in very special cases. But their value now is inestimable, but you can't compare that value now to the value that he might have had on them when he sold them or cut them up.
I have another odd question
You
for
hold
you.
up one of your tanzanite specimens again?
Yeah. You want to see one?
Please.
You can see both.
Oh, amazing.
That one and that one.
Wow. Thank you.
It's
Amazing.
funny, I told you I was in Africa in 1960 at the time of just about the time when the first tanzanite crystals were found. So I was in Nairobi and John Saul knew about them. They were little tiny things like that. And they were really pretty. I got a couple of them, you know, $10 each or whatever they were at the time. But I always liked them because they have an interesting property of being called trichroic. They have different colors in the 3 different dimensions, the way that you look at them. And they're really neat. And now Marcus Budil is selling ones that are probably 10 inches high. I don't know how much he charges, $3 million or something like that. They're a wonderful crystal.
They're amazing.
Of the gemstones, my wife doesn't care about gemstones at all. She likes if she has jewelry, it's got to be silver jewelry. But she does like the tanzanites. Again, I was there at the beginning. I could have been the tanzanite king. I could have been the silver king. I could have been the fluorite king. I could have been the rhodochrosite king. Here I am, just a prince.
King of the crystals.
I assume those tanzanites were cut and polished or not?
They are not cut and polished.
Wow.
You do not cut and polish single crystals for collectors.
I heard you, but I thought I was seeing something different. That's amazing.
No, they are not cut.
Wow.
This is how you dig them out of the ground.
Wow.
And by the way, there's nothing quite like it when you digging in the mud and the murk and you feel a smooth surface and you put your hands and you pull out something and it's a, you know, crystal like that with perfect faces and transparent. It's just nothing like it.
Wow.
You may excuse me, the crystals appear in nature as separate items and you just pull them out of somewhere?
Somewhere like the original time when I said the gypsum, you go up to this big mud bank covered with poison ivy and you dig in the mud and the crystals are just sitting there buried in the mud. You go to the quartz crystals in Arkansas and you have a wall of rock and the crystals are coming out of the rock. So you got to go and hack them with saws and picks and everything and hack them out. You go to Herkimer, New York, and they have the quartz crystals. Those are in big limestone deposits, which is really hard. And so you take sledgehammers to break it open. You go into a mine like Elmwood in Tennessee, and the miners are drilling holes to pull out ore bodies, and every so often they'll hit a vug or a hole in the rock, and inside that are these beautiful crystals. So there's all ways of finding them. But it's always a surprise. Yeah, I mean, for the non-collectors, there's one that is really puzzling. People think that we are only interested in the very expensive, the very costly, the very beautiful specimens, but every collector knows what this is.
Who doesn't love a great pyrite?
And they know where it's from. And they
It's
probably
from
know the person
Spain.
who dug it up. These are perfect cubes of pyrite out of Spain. You go to a wall of not mud, but hardened mud, and these are just studded in there. And all you got to do is break them out. Perfect cubes. Now, I know how they got this way. I know how they were formed. I know a lot about them. And I still think they are miracles.
And Rock and I volunteer some at Smithsonian, and that's a question we often get from people when they see the crystals. They can't believe that they are not cut or polished. They're always amazed by that, and I think they have a hard time believing it.
I've dug up some.
One of the famous
I think
kinds
it, and I have a hard time believing it, and I've seen it with my own eyes.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
I know how they happened, and I still don't believe it. But one of the fancier ones is they start to be believers when you give them a geode and you crack it open and you find crystals inside. You know
Right.
that nobody polished those.
I did want to clarify my question. I wasn't talking about polishing like with rock saw polishing. I meant for the silver specimens, don't they tarnish over time? Like would you not do collectors polish them like you with silver polish to keep them shiny?
There are some, the answer is both yes and no. They are more valuable if they are not dipped in any of that stuff. Because the original sheen, the original patina means a lot to the collector. And when they are dipped into the silver thing, it comes out with sort of a different whitish silver surface. So no, you generally don't do that. But yes, you do clean specimens all the time, This is a crystal of sapphire. But you had to clean it up. You would get rid of the muddy, you get rid of the iron stains, you put it in acid to make it clean, but you don't do anything to change the fundamental nature of the crystal.
Okay.
Is that from Madagascar, that corundum crystal?
Pardon?
Is that from Madagascar, that corundum you just showed?
Well, I'd have to look up that one. I don't think so, no. I think that is from somewhere in Africa, but not Madagascar.
I saw some of the large purple sapphires from Jack Halpern's collection went to auction recently. They were far out of my budget, but I was looking at them enviously.
Jack Halpern had a phenomenal collection. As I say, walking into that room fundamentally changed me. And give me 1 minute, I'll be right back. The first showcase I did at Tucson, the Tucson Gem and Mineral Show, was inspired by those slabs of tourmaline from I saw in Halpern's collection. And I named my case, the first time I put on a display with several museums that I convinced to go along with me, was called Color and Tourmaline. And it was a result of that. And these are those slabs.
Oh my goodness.
And they were given to me by Rob Levinsky. Rob holds a seminar in minerals every August. And then he has a plain thing at his place, his gallery in Richardson, Texas. And I'm wandering around, and then somebody calls me and says, Gene, you got to come here. And there's a crowd around, and Rob reaches into the case and pulls out this this wonderful pair of things that inspired me back in 1973.
Crazy.
Yeah. Oh, my God.
Yeah, it is amazing.
Do you like, was that little sandstone that you showed us in the original or at the beginning, the actual one from when you were a kid?
No, it's not the actual piece. I mean, it was just a piece of sandstone I got out of it. Neither was the shale.
Because I have some of I have a couple of the original little minerals that I got when I was about 5 years old. I remember those, and I still have them.
I have most of the specimen. Anything that was really identified as a mineral, I do have going back that far. All the Purdue, when I was at Purdue, the gypsums and the calcites, I still have those. The ones from Ohio that I would collect occasionally, the ones from Michigan. So I have all, and the ones I got in Norway. So I have all those that I still have. But a piece of sandstone is, it's also polycrystalline.
I want to, Gene, I want to personally thank you for your time, for putting this together for all of us. I would say that this was an immense highlight in my year. Thank you again. It was inspiring, to see your journey through this. And it's just absolutely awesome. And again, thank you for donating what you have donated around the world and to the collections.
Tell you one other fun time I had is I became very good friends with a geologist who walked on the moon, Jack Schmidt, Apollo 17, which is, to me, is exciting. Here's a guy that walked on the moon. I can tell you two stories that are fun about it. Number one is that I was running the judging for science fairs for high school kids at the science fairs that were sponsored by Intel. And so I was running a judgment of the best case for an Intel award, where I would bring in all
Science Talent Search?
Pardon?
Was that the Science Talent Search?
No, that's the Westinghouse one. This was the Intel Science and Engineering Fair, ISEF.
Oh, okay.
International Science and Engineering Fair. They have 1,200 booths by all the kids around the world doing things. And I was one. I set up the judging for Intel, and I was able to get a couple of people of experts from outside to join us. They were specialists in certain areas. So I asked Jack Schmidt to come and every year he would come and do the judging with us. And one time we were walking around and there was an exhibit on Earth and planetary sciences, and a young girl was doing a thing on the craters of the moon. So here's Jack Schmidt standing there listening to a lecture by a 16-year-old telling about how the craters of the moon were found. And then at the end of her talk, she gave a great talk. It turns out her parents were geologists. She gave a great talk, but afterwards they said, by the way, that's a crater that Jack Schmidt was standing on a few years. And then one time, Jack, I went to China. Rob and I went to China. I invited Jack to go along to give a talk there, and he gave a talk on the geology of the moon in China. So we then went out rock collecting. So I actually have a picture of him and me in a quartz mine digging out quartz crystals.
Everybody was speechless after that comment. I just want to say that was really wild.
Great beginning to the new year. Great beginning.
Thank you, man.
Thank you very much.
Fantastic presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.